Hi, everyone. This is Shubhendu, and welcome to my podcast. Why did we start this podcast? Now, for the longest of time, as you all know, there is a lot of frenzy about AI and what AI can do and cannot do. And for the past 2 years in my career, working with a lot of clients, we have been asking the question that can AI do this or can AI do that? And now, as we kind of enter into the new era of agentic AI, which has been around for the last few months, and there's been a lot of new developments, including the latest models being released from all across the world. The question has now flipped a little bit. Question is about should we let AI do it or not? And if we are going in that direction, how should we make sure that these agents can do things like at a pace which we could never possibly imagine a human doing it? And if that happens, does it make sense? And how do we control these agents? Because if there was one person doing something at a pace of one task an hour, now it's going to go to like 100, probably thousands of tasks done in an hour. And who keeps a check on that? And who makes sure that we have the proper data and the infrastructure to support that? So to talk about this, I have my friend Brent Lewis, who leads the data and AI team at Armstrong, with me today, who's going to talk about his experience and his thoughts around how this new era, how can a company or a team or a leader equip themselves to deal with the scenario. So Brent, thank you for taking time to speak to me today. Yeah, let's start with what are you doing at Armstrong in terms of AI, and what is the shift that you have seen over the past few months, let's say?
Absolutely. Thanks for the invite. I appreciate the opportunity. Looking forward to it. So I lead the data and AI team for Armstrong. Our company is 166 years old. So for perspective, when I start talking about what we're doing there, it's a very old company. So we came into existence between the two technology innovation eras. So you think about, we started right after steam and manufacturing techniques were really introduced. And then shortly thereafter, diesel, electric kind of took off. Our company was formed in the midst of a technology revolution. Here we are 166 years later in a very similar, arguably the biggest technology shift we've seen in our existence as humans. So I think for us, it's a really important stage. So we are scaling right now out of our crawling phase. So you asked what we're doing at Armstrong, and our whole strategy. I don't get the crawl, walk, and run sort of segmentation. The crawling we've been doing for the last roughly year and a half, and that's building a foundation. We'll probably talk some about that, what it takes to really have agents that are controllable, efficient, accurate. And now we're starting to come out of that. That's in place. The team's in place, and now we're coming out of that with putting things into production, testing those systems, and starting now to get into how do you actually put these in production with the right governance, the right process, and the right tools. So I think to your question, what has changed so significantly? We saw this in our strategy. We had 2028, I believe, when we initially started the strategy 3 years ago, was we phrased it as fully integrated AI within our business. Today, I would describe that as a fully autonomous agentic workforce. Now, that wasn't the way we worded it a couple of years ago. I think what's changed so significantly is that theme went from, hey, agents will be impactful. Agents meaning, I think a year ago, agents that would do one or two tasks individually and wouldn't tie those together. Now it's that workforce concept. It's agents that pull tasks together in multiple tasks, work with agents together in a process. And that becomes your kind of your AI at scale, as opposed to just having your individual solutions you've built out. So I think that to me is probably the most like impactful change I've watched over the last 6 months to, a little less than a year. And the tools, which we'll probably talk about as well, I think have really impacted that.
That's interesting. So you said something very interesting. Well, when we talk about agents now, and I talk to a lot of CFOs and other C-suite executives who are still confused. Now, how do you recognize these agents? Are these tools to you, or are these like any other users? Because depending
Mm.
on one way or the other, that makes a huge difference in how you bring the security and the governance piece and the audit trail around that. What's your thought on
That-
that?
That's a good question. And I'm sure the C-suite people are probably much smarter than me. So I'll give you my answer. But I think that the way I was referring this to the business the other day, I had a conversation with our business teams, and they were struggling with the same concept. Like they were very cautious of what they were calling AI, and they were kept referring to agents. And I could tell from the conversation what they were really referring to was not autonomy. It was automation. So we took a step back and I asked them, I said, can you give me your definition of what you would call autonomous or excuse me, an agent? And they paused for a little bit and the person that was giving the response back gave a very automation response. So I think to your question, the difference to me is the agents that we have, I'll call it traditionally, which is kind of funny. The concept's not very old, but when we first talked about agents, it was very much take a task, automate a task with some generative AI kind of decision-making process, and then it was done. Today, agents to me are just like a user. They have the same capabilities. You've built them with the same security, the same freedom to use the systems. Like you give it tools, you give it skills, and it's just a digital version of a user that works at the behest of the user who is the human in the business. I think that's another important distinction. They don't just go do their own thing. They report to, or they are the responsibility of a human that uses them in their day-to-day activity. So I think the autonomous piece is important. It has to have autonomy to do what you've scripted to do with you checking it as a human. And I do think it is definitely a user, I would call it, in the system. It's probably have a system IDs,
Yeah.
but they will have the same concept and securities, restrictions, reviews that you would if you were a user.
Yeah, interesting. And now me and you are talking because we live in the AI these days. But earlier this week, a friend told me that Shuk, this might be obvious to you, but it's not obvious to a lot of people.
Mm.
So, Brent, I want to invite you to kind of help like distinguish, because what you just said is the foundation of understanding how can we leverage AI. Now, AI means agents, and then there is a component of automation as well, which is kind of now becoming more and more efficient when we have an agents working with it. Plus there is a middle layer, like which is like AI assistant. So if you have to distinguish the workflow or like the automation piece, an AI assistant where, like, let's say Brent is working with 5 agents and supervising them. They're not making all the decisions themselves, but you're supervising them. And then the agent piece where someone or some of the agents are running 24/7 without your approval, unless you ask it to, and carrying out the task. So if I have to explain it to my viewers or listeners, is there an easy way you can give them a model to distinguish, okay, this is a use case for workflow? Because sometimes people also overkill. I want to do
Yeah.
it on the company to make an agent for this process. And what really comes out of after multiple hours of discovery is you're looking, like you said, you're looking for automation. So help us understand, Brent.
Yeah, I do my best. I think the distinction for a user who's thinking, how do I get an agent to do work for me, or how do I get a process automated? It starts with the workflow. You have to start with, what do you do as a human today? Like, what is your activity you're performing? Map that out. I think once you do that mapping process, it doesn't have to be like every keystroke. It's like, take the buckets, right? If you look at that map process, I think that's when it becomes really clear. You can kind of then tie to those, circle the ones that are automation only. And I think at that point, the user, it becomes much more apparent. Oh yeah, that's a process where if I just give it a script, an if-then script, it can then go and do that process and automate that every time I just review exceptions. But when you see a decision, usually it's a decision comes into play. That's when it becomes, you have to get into that autonomous. Like, it has data, usually some sort of automation has been performed, maybe a series of automations, brings those automations back. And then from there is a decision. Yes, I approve this. No, I don't approve that. That's where you can have AI do the process with the right set of rules again, and look at exceptions and do the normal audits you would do in any kind of system, where you go back and periodically review, because the drift issues and the things that go with any model are important there. But I think that's the way I would describe it. Take the workflow first, map it out, and then it becomes much clearer, I think, to the user to understand where autonomy is important and where just automation is very helpful.
Yeah, thank you. That makes sense because a lot of times, and I'm a car guy, Brent, so I love making analogies related to car. And I have said this probably multiple times. A few of my listeners might be like, okay, come on, man. I tell them, if you have to go from let's get a good place. Let's say Philadelphia to New York City. Now you can, and you're just one person. Now you can go on a motorbike if it's a nice sunny day, even though I won't recommend that. Or you can take your car, or you can buy a truck or a bus and go there. You will still get to the destination. But the thing is, does it make sense to rent or buy a bus and then drive yourself to downtown like New York City? No. And then people like, yeah, that makes sense. So similarly, when we talk about a lot of use cases, and this is very, very prevalent, I can't emphasize enough. I've spoken to, like, as a team, maybe like 25 different executives over the past quarter. And it's the same thing, Brent. Like they think about, or they want to do something with AI. They want to like increase the productivity of their team. They want to do something revolutionary or innovative, but sometimes they're just looking for a workflow automation. And maybe 10% of that or 15% of that is something with the agent. So yeah, I think that's very important for the companies to understand the differences. That's a great way of saying it. Now, if we talk about, like, let's say just purely agentic space, and I was having this conversation earlier this morning. I had a discovery call with one of the clients, and they wanted to implement AI for their governance. So governance and security. And they expect that, let's say Brent and Shub are the employees in a company, and Brent has a super admin access. Shub has read-only access to a specific part of the company. Now we have an agent which has been built for the company, which has, again, close to all admin access. They want us to be able to interact with the agents, and then agent should decide, Brand has super admin access, so I'm going to let him get all the data I need. Whereas Shub only has display only access for a specific part of the company. So I need to kind of look at my response and cater it. That made me think, are we overcomplicating this in terms of security? Because again, the whole word of AI agents came in line, like you have concurred to it a while back, is giving the agency to the agent to do a certain task, and it's no longer dependent on the two employees, which is you and me in this case. So are we overcomplicating it, or is this just a beginning, and maybe we are like figuring it out as a like a company in this case?
I think it's probably a combination of both. I would say the needing to figure out is a really important step. So, like we do now with a lot of users, you've got to give users who are starting to understand how AI could impact their world, how agents could work, a lot of grace. You have to give them some freedom to overthink something and then pull it back. Because if you don't, I think it's very difficult for somebody to get from zero to fully automated. I mean, you have to there's a journey in there, just like it is with us as an overall team. And you have to invite them along in that. So I think probably some of that's overthinking it. I saw a really good 9 block the other day that was shared in some material that one of our team members had built. And it was a display of like, where do you have the appropriate interaction with AI and decision making, and where don't you? And it had like, typical 9 block where it goes top right is the really, really difficult and very risky type of activity. And bottom left is very low risk, no risk, and very, very low lift activities. So like the AI and being able to give it autonomy is really really simple, great spot in that lower left. And you get more and more, I would call it cautious and thoughtful as you get farther to the top and to the right. And top right is where the human has to do most of the decision making because it's very high risk or it's very complex, and with the assistance of AI. I'm not saying the AI does not play in that. I think what you were describing in terms of the agent trying to build for the governance process is probably some of that top right. It's one of those areas where significant risk, right? I think most of us would agree, security, data security, the whole GRC process has a significant risk there. I think you have to be at least cautious that you are having a human in the loop in most of the very important decisions. Again, you can think about your workflows. You can have authorizations, you can have approvals, all that done by an agent with at some point the human looking at it and going, yes, that's the right decision. So I think we overthink it a lot, but I don't think I almost give some grace there with the overthinking, at least at this phase. Now, if you're in a journey where you've got, very robust agent workforce, say a year and a half from now, and you're still doing that, then I would probably be a little more frustrated. But I think at this point, give the freedom to make a little bit of errors in terms of where the right fit is. Because if you do something, you figure it out. That's what I tell our teams. Like, just build something. Get off of start from the crawling, get up off the ground and start to walk. At that point, you'll figure out when you fall down how to get back up. If you don't do that, you never get to the running phase. So I'd rather see somebody overthinking something at first as opposed to, I'm just not going to do it because I think it's too hard.
Yeah. You said something, I'm going to pick on your word, agent workforce. Now, this is something we're not yet seeing a lot. We're seeing it quite a bit for the tech blogs and stuff, but the agent workforce. And one of the things, now this is not the executives or the management or the leadership. When I speak to a lot of my friends, my colleagues, my peers, a lot of them, when we bring up this agent workforce, they have this notion. It's a workforce, yes. Now this workforce is meant to replace human workforce, which in my mind is incorrect. But I think there's a big problem and again, there's a lot of negative media, and probably it's working well for the company who are doing it. For example, I wouldn't name the vendors, but like there's a lot of companies that are like, oh, AI is going to cut like 95% of jobs, et cetera, et cetera. What I see as an opportunity for the company when we talk about the agent workforce, these are augmentation. So if you have 100 people today, it's not that you're going to bring an agent workforce and become 10 and 90 employees will be laid off, and then you'll have the agent workforce supplement that. I see it as a different way. Like it's about you have 100 people. How do you enable them use AI, the agent workforce, and then you can be as productive as a company with 1,000 employees, if not more. It can be more, but like 10x is a benchmark, and that really I feel that makes an impact to the listener at that time. But what do you think about that? And how do we communicate this better? How do people kind of wrap their head around that AI is a boon necessarily for all of us, and it can make companies more competitive. Like small boutique consulting firms now are able to compete with larger SIs and be more efficient and more fast. I'll let you give your thoughts on that, Brent.
Yeah, this is one of those conversations that's got a lot of nuances to it. You know, I chatted a little about this when we were at Sapphire together, but I
Yeah.
think the you're correct. There are vendors, wouldn't want to name names, but some are using it, I think, for shareholder engagement. You know, we're going to cut this many jobs. You know, our SG&A drop by X percentage. You know, and it
Yeah.
immediately bumps share price. I think that's a dangerous move. I think it's the wrong message in a lot of ways, as you and I have already discussed. If you think about how an agent truly is useful and how it has to be governed, it's hard to theorize even how you reduce staff by that much without cutting your productivity. It's just we're not that phase yet. So I think a lot of that is used very effectively for shareholder pricing. I heard at least two CEOs give a very different opinion of that, which I 100% agree with, was if you really want to leverage AI strength, don't use it for cutting costs and SG&A, use it for scaling. And that's exactly what we are at Armstrong are doing with our approach is if you want to continue to grow, if you want to take more market share, now let's say for instance, your TAM is completely tapped out in your market. I don't know if that even exists in most markets, but let's say it did, then this might not apply. But if you had market that you could go after in your segment or an adjacent segment that you could get capabilities in, why would you not take that approach and grow your business with that capability as opposed to that restrictive kind of cutting it back with that? It's a very minimalist mindset, I think. And I think that's a risky mindset. So I think if I was giving you my opinion, I would say that you and I are aligned that the ability for AI, and if we're talking about agents specifically, and if you take that workforce concept at scale, that allows you to then scale your business at a pace and rate that was not available to you before that was around. That technology was there. I think that's the promise of AI. It's not eliminating jobs. It's putting people in jobs in decision making and in innovation spaces that you would had a hard time doing before because you were in the mundane. Think of how much time we spend in our average jobs doing just tasks that are required to get work done,
Yeah.
communications and other things you do and decision making. And I combine this data and I come up with an analysis of that. All those things that make us effective as a business are largely are tasks that if you could automate them to an agent with the right process, the right governance, would give you time to focus on growing the business, like the things in the area that you don't have time for, but probably most of us enjoy in our work. That's the part that engages me. I think if you had more time for that, that's how you really take a business that is, take whatever your size is today, double, triple the size of that at a pace that was not available before. And I think the important part of that too is if you take this whole conversation back to why would you even do agents in the first place, is that's how it differentiates you from your competition. So I think that ability to differentiate, you made the comment that you could take a much smaller company today and compete with larger companies. That is a reality. And that's, I think, the reality of larger businesses have to be thoughtful of is you have this advantage in your scale over time, your processes and your people. That moat is not as substantial as it was a year ago. And so you have to be cautious of that and thinking about that. And how do you leverage what you have advantage today? You have more people, you have more data, you have more capital in a lot of cases. How do you leverage that to stay equally as ahead of some of the smaller businesses that can use agents effectively and scale. And I guess getting off from our original topic, but I think that's important. When you think about the workforce and the why, I 100% agree with you. It's not, if the focus is reducing your SG&A and headcount, I would caution very much caution leadership on that approach. I think that's a wrong message. I think if investors are smart, that sends a message that's not probably healthy if you think about what's going on there, because it just tells you that business is shrinking, it's not growing. So
Yeah. And now you also mentioned towards the end of your answer about the scaling aspect of it. So now it's one thing to set up an agent and give it a task and can give it to the tools to connect. It's another thing to scale it up and roll it out for the organization. And since you've been doing this at Armstrong, now in my mind, I see the three main buckets. There is the data layer, which of course all the AI agents need. There's a permission layer where, okay, the governance piece comes into play. And then there is, in my mind, I may be wrong, there is also the layer of where users are supervising these agents. Because at this point today, I can't say from my experience that agents can do everything end to end. So I really see like, okay, it has to be governed. So now, if we talk about those three buckets, and please, if there's any other areas, you can add that too. What do you think breaks first when we scale up the operation? Because POC is one thing, and when we roll out, there's so many other issues that can come up. What have you experienced, and how did you deal with that?
break first. That's an interesting question. I guess it depends on where the business has grown in their development and their scaling strategy. I guess would be my answer to that. I'd have to see more detail to tell you which one I thought was highest risk, because I get that question sometimes. Yeah, people ask, well, what's the highest risk? And well, you have to give me a category first, because they're very different risks in different categories. I think probably the likely breakdown point, if you're scaling and you haven't, well, even if you have thought it through correctly, the most likely breakdown is going to be in the governance. I think what will happen is that the AI will do, at least in initial scaling, will do a pretty good job of being accurate, unless your data really is bad. But let's say your data is pretty good. What I think will be the challenge is getting it too much access and AI and agent perspective, and it going places you're not sure it should have gone, or it did things on your behalf and you weren't checking. I think that's probably the highest risk, is to getting too aggressive with it, which again, I think is why the POCs and the pilots are very important. I mean, you got to have it tested out and say, what did it do that I didn't expect? Or what did I miss here? And I get good at that. So as you scale it, you're improving along the way. I think my answer is it's most likely the governance side. You could argue data is as equally as risky, because we think about the context of data and how AI needs data. So you just start there. Good AI needs good data, right? I think most people conceptually agree with that. The challenge, I think, for us, and I think most businesses are not any different, is that getting like really high quality data available at the pace of which you want to innovate from an AI perspective is very challenging. So getting ahead of yourself in the development and rollout of AI without having a really strong process around your data, how do you govern the assets? Who owns those? How do you approve those? What is AI allowed to use and not allowed to use? If you haven't really map that out well, you're going to get a really strong AI system that's really dumb, which is a high risk, so that they're probably very close cousins to each other in terms of risk. But again, it depends on the company and what your current perspective is on your two situations. You have a really good data process and you have a really good governance security process. I think those two things, if you have muscle there, leverage it. Like we're taking the approach of, we're publicly traded, so we have a pretty good, I refer to it as a muscle. We have a pretty good skill set and a process over time of our SOX process. How do you manage that? And we're mimicking our governance process around the AI agents exactly in that same concept, the same buckets, the same type process, same type approvals, using people that have that strength already to do those pilots, because they think that way already. That's been how we've approached it. So I think it just depends on where your maturity is, and be cautious of where you're immature. I think spend some extra time focusing there, or that's probably what'll break.
Yeah, having led 15 years in SAP or ERP industry, would say I kind of mostly agree with you. From my point of view, what I've seen in the past with the companies, the kind of data they have, I'm 101% sure the first thing which will fail is the data layer. And I this is my view, but I openly say that if you're failing at the third layer, which is the user's approval, like you supervisor layer, you have made it far, man. So now you have got to the level of how you're supposed to be using AI today, and now you're just finding it hard to keep up with the
Mm.
agentic work. So yeah, you're not able to approve. So if you're on the third workflow, any one of you, kudos. Good luck
Yeah, I agree.
maintaining that as well. But yeah. Now, one thing which a lot of the companies ask, and I think you might also have a very strong opinion on that. We're building agents, and that's good. A lot of companies with vibe coding and everything, there's a lot of tools available right now. And again, the full stack development team, it's also now augmented. They can do a lot more in less time. But still, we have the ERP, like enterprise leaders, whether it's SAP, whether it's Oracle NetSuite, whether it is Salesforce, ServiceNow, any one of them, they are bringing their own native agents. So, what do you think should be a good way to approach this? Because, of course, no one wants to do duplicate effort. No one wants to invest in an agent which goes and checks ServiceNow or checks SAP, but yet they want to have their own layer because these ecosystems, and we talk about agent to agent protocol at MCP server, are being designed to be connected. So, what do you think about that? How should a leader approach this? And what should be their framework or the guardrail about choosing where to develop what?
A great question that I think we're still trying to work out exactly the right answer. I don't think anybody has that completely figured out. I give you my opinion, which is the
Yeah.
best I can do at this point. My caution is that to start with your original, I think heart of your question is that buy versus build kind of mentality. Any technology stack agents are no different, right? How do you approach that? What's the risk and what's the reward if you do one or the other? I think the tools that are available, the coding tools available, have made that decision process much simpler today when it comes to a build because you have ability to ideate and produce and build much faster, which is that whole SaaS, warning and the reaction that, what was it? Probably now it's 6, 8 months ago, where the market reacted to that. I think that's a very real change in how we look at buy versus build, whether it's agents or whatever the case is. So there's that component I think is worth noting. For us, it has been. And we have taken an approach of now we're focusing heavily, which we were not even 6 months ago, in that build our own agent type process, control plane ability. I think when you have large scale systems, your ERPs, your CRMs, those tools that have agent capability, I think it just takes a really cautious and careful approach to the maturity level, how well developed they are. My gut tells me, and this is again my own opinion here, is that the tools that are available and the just the innovation and the newness in that space of agent builds, a organization that has the right focus, the right team, the right data, I think can make faster progress in a scaling perspective with their own tools as opposed to trying to leverage a tool of a large system. I'm not saying that that's not possible in a large system. I think I'm very cautious of that. We're taking an approach of doing both actually. So again, if you're not quite sure of the decision, try both simultaneously, right? And see which one wins kind of concept. Because I think the issue with having large scale systems only, like take for instance, your ERP system, which is a lot of the really strong data for most organizations, ours included. If you take their agentic workforce that they're rolling out and building and you leverage that entirely, that has to go outside of that. Workflows don't live inside of an ERP, for an example, or a CRM. They go across multiple systems, if not, in some cases, your entire environment stack. Everything from
Yep.
email to SharePoint to the ERP to the, you name the system for a full workflow. That's where I think the risk starts to get significant. I think when you have a system that's built specifically for that application, whether it's ERP, CRM, you take your pick, and you want to scale it across your entire stack, I think that's where it significantly increases the risk. Now, how do you leverage the available agents within a platform and pair that with other platforms that have agents? And then how do you control that? I think that's really the overall question. In my mind, that's where the overall question lies. Like, how do you have, I think I've heard a term control plane as a kind of a term used as you were describing that stack layer, where you have an ability for the agents to be secure, monitor where they're going, whose behalf they're going, what they've changed across your entire platform. I think is really, for us, that's the journey we're on right now, is trying to figure out how do you scale that outside of your main data system so that as you build, you're building in the right place. What you don't want to do is spend a year building agents that are very robust and realize that I now have to move those or connect those in a different system
Yeah.
because I can't scale those 5 or 6 systems together. They're independent of each other, which doesn't really, reach the true vision of I think what a workforce looks like, which is it's a full stack type
Yeah.
workflow.
I think I have a slightly different like opinion towards I keep I'm educating myself, but I'll stand corrected if I'm wrong in future. But as of today, I think if you are using these big gigantic huge systems like SAP or Salesforce, and they have some agents live in their system, and that agent, when you go in that system, does a job for you what you're looking for, you need to keep those agents there. So because again, there will be less overhead for you to kind of maintain the compliance, the
Absolutely.
governance piece on those agents. And then what people need to worry about is where in their ERP or their CRM, which of the use cases they're not able to have with the standard agents. And in those cases, it makes sense to build those in an like a different layer, orchestration layer. But nevertheless, you need a orchestrate because again, this is also my thought, which like using my common sense here, I do not see a future where these big giants will come and say, hey, from our agentic studio, you can call this 5 different agents. I think it's more about just similar to the back in the days when, and you might have seen it live, Brent, when HTTP came in, hypertext transfer protocol. People started using it a very different way. When you go on a blog, like let's say again, I'm giving a vague example. When you go on a blog like TechCrunch, and you see 5 different topics on various aspects. Not all of those content are always inside TechCrunch. They
Mhm.
often give you a link, okay, see more, and then it takes you to the original media or where you can go. And I think uh, a little bit of that is how you should see the agent world as well. There's a little bit of thing that you need to summarize, and you need to have an orchestration layer where you have your agents, your workflows, etc. Like you said, the workflows span across multiple systems. And we have a thing called, and again, I don't want to bore the audience with the technical jargon, but agent to agent protocol, where you can actually have your workflows on your orchestration layer call various agents across different systems like seamlessly. So that should not be a point of concern in that. But one thing, Brent, I want to like on this zone, I want to ask is so we talked about this orchestration and agents residing on these big systems. When you are actually building those agents yourself on the whether it's a like homegrown orchestration platform, etc. What models should we use? Now, I'm kind of diverting to a topic, and a lot of companies are starting to think, oh, we don't want to. And I have heard this more in this last year, like since January, than in my life. We don't want a vendor lock in. We don't want to be stuck with one LLM provider to run our agents because every day there's a new model coming in. What's your take on that? And how should we kind of decouple this risk?
Very much a proponent of your latter explanation there. Do not lock yourself into a vendor. We made a decision really early in our journey around AI organizationally. We did not run out and buy ChatGPT licenses for the whole organization, and we held off actually at some pain initially because people were really pushing for, why aren't you doing something? You need to be giving a license. Copilot we introduced because we have a very strong Microsoft shop, and that made sense for us. And that was our original journey to help secure an LLM. But it took us until the very beginning of this year that we rolled out what I would call it a excuse me, a model garden, the best way to describe it, where it allows the users to interact in a secure environment that we have hosted that gives up to 80 models they can interact with. And it has some logic around if I'm a user that just wants to prompt and then that's in the background, there's an agent actually making a decision on what model to use based off your prompt. That was our approach. But to dig into your question, it was done because we did not want to lock into any vendor. Because if you look at the pace of innovation in that area is almost mind blowing. And so to pick a horse in that race, I think is very dangerous. It allows you to get in a situation where your innovation as an organization will be blocked by the ability to get outside of the one you've locked into. So, and that kind of plays a little bit into some of that earlier conversation around the ERPs or the other systems that are large. Like, how do you leverage their systems? Because you're locking in some respect to their pace of innovation. So I think it's very important to do whatever you can within your technology ability and budgets to be very flexible, open source as much as possible. Again, my opinion, that can be
Yeah.
argued, but keep the open source from your data processes to your models to the things you build. Because portability was a really important concept early on for us. So if I want to take something and I want to take it from the cloud to on premise for some reason, let's say my workloads to this point of models, excuse me, if I want to take my models and I want to be able to put them somewhere on premise so I can control my costs, because that whole tokenomics is a very popular
Yeah.
topic these days. That's one way you can take your costs and help control them. So if I have agents that are working 24 hours and they're doing fairly automated tasks, these are at the lower level of my agent workforce, you may want to host those on some sort of application or hardware. That way you don't have the cost of the token burn. So there's all kinds of reasons why I think portability, which lends itself to non-vendor lock, is super important. I don't think there's any winner in the near term or even the long term. I don't think in terms of the model space, even
Yeah.
the tooling space. I mean, just take the battle between OpenAI and Claude, for example, and just how that's gone back and forth, continues to
Yeah.
on an almost weekly basis. You even there you have to be cautious of, don't get into long term agreements. I actually heard a podcast yesterday where they're one of the guests was talking about that whole concept of, in today's world, the long term vendor contracts are very, very few. They're very risky. You have to have the very large systems and stick to their basic functionality for those long term agreements, because you want flexibility. And if you get a 3 to 5 year agreement, how can you see 5 years on the road in an AI world today? You just can't.
Yeah, I totally agree because did you check out the new Japanese model which came up last week?
No.
I think it's Sakana Fuju or Fug. I don't know how we pronounce that, but they say it's on par with Opus 4.8.
Mm.
So I'm very curious. I'm gonna try it soon. But you're right. Like even if you forget those models outside of North America, OpenAI, Anthropic, and Google itself, MR4 and other models, it's like every day you see something new.
Yeah.
So it's very important to kind of like the way we have to think it is models are the engine which you should be able to like flexibly change. Just like, again, I'm going to make another car analogy. When you go for a Formula One race, depending on the weather, whether it's overcast, it's raining, or it's dry in summer, you change the kind of tires you have on your car.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're going to just have a lot of trouble in the race. Similarly, the models are something which you should tread carefully and make sure that you're not locked into one model. Now, last couple of questions. One is there's also this question about, do you need this large language model? There is a lot of talk, and I've seen an uptick in the literacy of people knowing the private models. So, like, if you're doing a certain task, people are like, can I run it locally or can I run it inside the company? I don't wanna the whole token consumption aspect that you mentioned. What do you think? How should we tread that, and what part of the strategy should we have the private, like even the LLMs or small language models?
I think they all have their place. I think it goes back to your comment about lock-in. I think the large language models will always have a place in our I would call it a near-term future. And you can't go too far out because I don't know what will change, but I think they have the strength. Just having the ability to have models of that size, train on that level of data and that number of parameters, is super advantageous to delivering, I think, really strong, much smaller models, distilled models. I think that's where the strength comes from. Along with other learning type process and stuff they do, which is really, I think, very cool what's going on in that space. But the large language models the frontier models will have their space. They're going to continue to, I think, push the boundaries, at least for a while anyway, in terms of what we can do. I think they have an important part in your stack, I think. So if I think about from myself, and I think how we approach it organizationally, is that you have certain models for certain things, just like your tire description, right? So I have very short, very fast segment of a race. I'm going to put on my soft compound tires that are going to wear out very quickly, but they're going to grip, right? But they have a very specific use case. That's an example of something like a very, very strong frontier model like an Opus is going to be very important to you. Because if I have a really complex, highest level agent orchestration at the top of my stack, I want the smartest one that I can possibly have. That's a place for that type of model, right? I think that's a good way of thinking about, as I drop down my stack, that I get into, and we didn't talk much about this, but orchestration from a full agentic workforce, how that looks. If you think about it from an org chart kind of perspective, highest level, I have, my CEO or my chief of staff, which, hopefully has the best view and strategically, and smartest is probably a strong word, but has that kind of level of detail. And then as you go down your organizational stack, you get all the way down to that worker B kind of lowest level. You may be able to put a very purpose-built, lightweight, you can put on your own hardware, open source model that's very good at doing that task, or those sort of level of tasks. It's not going to be a great decision maker at the top, but it has a very good purpose at the bottom level. I think that's how you think about the models in my mind, where they have a fit, figure out where your use case is and what you're having them do, fit that in the right spot, and consider cost in that as well. You do not want Opus doing those mundane tasks at the bottom because it's not going to be cost effective. So I think they both will have their space. I think the open source model kind of environment is a lot of fun to watch. I think the strength is growing there by the day. And I
Yeah.
think that's going to be a whole other kind of avenue when the agent world becomes prolific. That's the space where they're going to differentiate, in my mind. It's going to be the open source ones will be everything from, okay, you'll be the top, but middle tier down, and the frontier models would be the expensive ones will be at the top where they're doing the really complex decision making.
I'm gonna again piggyback on something you said. So things are changing by the day here, whether it's open source or just the frontier models as well. Now, if we were to ask, and again, I could talk with you for hours, but I know we're approaching the top of the hour. But if there was a like a framework or some guidance that you want to share based on your experience in the AI space, if a leader needs to get up to speed and kind of build out their strategy for the next 6-12 months, I wouldn't even say 18 months because God knows how things will be in that period of time. But like if they have to plan or start planning, if they've not already started that, what would that guidance or like a piece of advice that you will give them? How should they keep themselves updated, and how should they plan out their next few months?
From an updating from a leadership level is keep really well informed. So podcasts, for example, I happen to be a very avid podcast listener. I've been doing that since the beginning of AI became a topic for me, and I was trying to educate myself. You can do a lot of great podcasts. Will give you information that you can just pick up. You pick up nuggets from that. You take that and you get back. If you're moving, usually I do it while I'm doing something else, exercise. You're moving. Get back to where I'm stationary, and I'll search that up and I'll go down the rabbit hole of that topic or that invite. I think that's a really great way to keep yourself informed. Stay connected to partners. I mean, the material out there right now on strategy around AI. This is a strategy question you're asking. I think is abundant. You can take everything from, you name your source, the top 5 audit firms. You take the Gartners. You take there's so many I think really strong thought leaders putting information out there. Digest that. Like take those different pieces of information, pull them together. For myself, I take a lot of that information that I think is related to each other. I will combine them, throw them into my favorite chat LLM, and I'll ask, detailed questions around, here's my thought process. Can you build something on this? Or here's what I think is going to work. You poke holes at that, like challenge me, those sort of things. I think that's how I would approach it from a strategy in a short term and a long term. I don't think they're very different from each other. Once you get your long term, to your point, 2-year strategy, I think that's long term. I think we're asked sometimes to think 3 years out, and it makes me chuckle. But I think you can probably go a year out and be pretty close, depending on how much detail you're asked to give. And 2 years out, you've got to be really flexible. I think on that, you've got to be willing to pivot and be, given grace enough to say, hey, we moved because of this is why. If you have the long-term strategy, then take that again with your own thought process, and then get your favorite lemon of choice to help challenge you on where are the holes. What do I need to think of? Here's my roadmap. Here's my strategy. Where are my gaps? I think that's how I personally do it. I know that Brian, our CIO, is very much in the same mindset. He and I will do that back and forth with each other. One of us will produce something. We'll come back with a bunch of different answers they've gotten off of their chat. We'd use different chats. I think that's a great way to help somebody really formalize their short-term strategy. I think if you're talking about strategy, formulation is one step. I think figuring out what your ambitions and your goals are. One of my cautions to people when they're thinking about the organization is, if you in that camp of an organization that's been, I would call it, cautious and not doing much to see what happened with AI, and now it's taking off faster than you can really think of catching up. Be cautious. Stay in that, pace yourself at appropriate levels, because you can easily get ahead of your skis and do some damage if you're too ambitious to try to catch up. There's only so much you can do. You and I, somebody, you're a car guy. Ironically, I'm a car guy as well. We didn't have a discussion. I spent 20 years of my early career in the automotive business, by the way, which I don't think you knew that. But I also like athletics and endurance sports. And I equate it a lot to trying to do some sort of long endurance type athletic pursuit. Let's say you want to run a marathon. If you have not been training and you want to do a marathon, there's only so much you can do to cheat that. You have to go through the process. You can expedite that. Maybe make it 6 months from a couch to a marathon. Set your expectations correct, but you have to set the expectation based off of where you are today. So just be cautious of that. That'd be my one warning. If you haven't been 2 or 3 years into trying to think this through and getting a map out, when you do it, make sure you're doing it at the pace that makes sense, not just to make leadership feel good about hey, I can do agents that full across organization a year from now. You have to think that through, and that we've talked about that scaling concept. You have to have, there's a lot of components. The foundation has to be in place to do that. So answer your question two ways. I think from a strategy standpoint, highly recommend research, research, research. Lots of good material out there that you can find either through things you pay for or through just services you can get off of searches from the internet and LLMs. And then use those, once you develop your strategy, use the LLM to challenge it, to close those gaps.
Wow, that's I couldn't answer that question any better. I'll add two things because that's something which I say this to a lot of our clients as well. Is whatever Brent said, follow that meticulously. And plus, when you're building your strategy, figure out the low hanging fruits. Because you can go in this infinite loop of planning and not getting an ROI. I think there's so many, the AI or the LLMs have become so advanced right now that there are tons of low hanging use cases that you can start to chase to solve, and which will give you the ROI to make up, whether you're trying to build up a business case or whether you're trying to recoup some of the investment and kind of invest again and can get better at AI. Look at those, look around, or if not, look for partners who can help you identify those things. Uh, and then this last thing is, and I wrote actually a blog, and this happened, Brent, on my like Father's Day. I was having a walk with my son, and for some reason, I have this I always have a plan, right? I'm gonna take my son for a walk. I'm gonna go here north on this street, then I'm gonna take a ride, and I'll do this circuit, and I'll be back. When I started with my son, he's almost 3 years old. It didn't go as expected, as you can imagine. He would stop at every turn, and he would observe things, say hello to people, play with some dogs, and look at the tree, ask me questions. And then it's when we were back and he went to bed, it dawned on me. And I don't know how. I think maybe I love my son too much, but the way that happened, I'm like, that's how the strategy should also be. Yes, you know your end goal, you know where you're going, but you have to observe how things are, whether it's in the company or in the market. What are the tools out there? And like Brent said, use AI for kind of doing the research, listen to podcasts, consume materials that can help you, because soon there will be time. It already has come that things move at a pace where it's hard to keep a track. So you need to get a help of some kind of AI tool which can summarize things for you for what you're looking for. But I think that's the best way for me to conclude my thought is make hire my son as a like a strategy consultant maybe. But yeah, I think that's perfect, Brent. So thank you again for your time. It's
Pleasure.
I don't know how the 1 hour passed, and I like I said, last time when we were planning for this, we spoke for like 45 minutes as well.
Yeah.
Today as well, it's the same thing, and I think it's because of our passion and like my respect to you, Brent, about how we kind of are seeing the AI unfold, and how some leaders, not all of them, are like on top of it, and that's what the world needs. That's what the organizations need. So thank you again, Brent, for your time. And
It's
yeah,
been a pleasure. Thank you for having me on the podcast. Enjoyed the conversation. Always enjoy talking to you. So you're right. We could probably talk for 2 or 3 hours and not get bored. You ended with a really good, I think, segment to your next podcast is that human component to AI. I think that would be a great kind of segment to your next podcast with somebody, is that even we've realized this, you can have the best strategy in the world, and then you take your business on the journey with you, like you and your son, and you realize you have to work with the people that are using these systems as well and enjoy that journey. So I really love how you ended that. I think that's a great segue into whatever your next podcast is. But thank you very much. Love the conversation.
thank you, Brent.